I'm a Dodge, but even though I know of many generations before me, in reality, my father is really the only one I had a chance to know. But I didn't know most of his early life until he sat down and told us.
My father was from Nebraska, a place called Morse Bluff, Nebraska, and his father had a homestead there. And he was one of the younger of about 12 children. And after his father died in 1893, I think it was, in the 1900s sometime, they sold the homestead and they split it up with the kids that were still left, and went on their merry ways. And he went to Colorado, where his older sister, lived in Sterling, Colorado. And then he stayed with her there and took up a homestead there in Colorado. And in the second year, he planted the whole thing in beans, and he still did pretty good, but he sold the place and made a profit. And then how he got down to New Mexico, I don't know, but anyway, he went there to Santa Fe somehow or another, and that's where he met my mother.
The year is 1601. The place, Mexico del Norte, slightly to the north of what is now Santa Fe, New Mexico. Some structures were built, and though most records for the period have been lost, local tradition indicates it was called Plaza de Arriba. In 1703, Captain Sebastian Martin received this property through a land grant. He enlarged the structures and rebuilt the hacienda, which was named the Plaza de Soledad, which it remained for another 100 years. Around 1821, the hacienda became a military training center for Mexican troops. The hacienda became known as Plaza de Luceros, named after the family which then held ownership. At about the end of the Mexican-American War in 1846, Elias Clark, a doctor from St. Louis, meets and later marries the heiress Maria Marta Lucero in Santa Fe. The good doctor became the first district judge for Rio Arriba County, and the hacienda served as the courthouse from 1850 to 1855. Elias and Maria's daughter, Elsa Clark, marries Luis Ortiz, who is both the sheriff of Rio Arriba County and her cousin. It was in this location that the son of a Nebraska farmer, Alson Dodge, met and married Luis's granddaughter, Maria Consuelo Delfino Ortiz. Connie is one of Gaspar Ortiz's daughters. And while Maria Ortiz's American roots have been shown to be quite deep, Alson's are just as impressive. In 1639, Richard Dodge came to the New World. His great-great-grandchildren fought in the American Revolutionary War. One of them, Joseph Dodge, is a second lieutenant in the American Army. Alson is his great-great-grandson.
And my mother's father wanted my dad to go and farm the family ranch. I think about in 1917, why he married my mother, and they went out to the ranch and lived out there for a short period of time, a couple years or something. I know that they lived in a place called La Madera, New Mexico, which was a Great Divide Colony of the Rocky Mountains, and the Great Divide Colony in La Madera, New Mexico. And I was born there. They were the first couple married there, and I was the first child born there.
Al and Connie's family grows to three with the birth of their first son, Timothy Putnam Dodge. Then, into this family, on July 16, 1920, Hugh Alson Dodge is born. He is the second son of Maria Consuelo, Connie, and Alson Dodge. Hugh and his brother Tim don't spend much time in New Mexico because either due to a bad economy or poor management, the Ortiz family has to sell the hacienda in 1921. The problems must have been brewing for a while because by the time of the sale, some of the members of the family had already moved to the Long Beach, San Pedro area of California. Al and Connie would move there in 1921.
Why do you think they moved? Why didn't they stay in New Mexico?
I don't know. I guess maybe they came out there to make their fortune.
And where did they
Do
settle?
something else.
San Pedro?
Settled in Los Angeles and then later moved to San Pedro. And they were living in Terminal Island when my brother, just younger than me, was born, because he was born in Terminal Island, California. And evidently Dad was working there at a fish cannery or someplace, doing some kind of work. Did all kinds of different kinds of jobs, because I know one time he told me that he was on tank construction work, building oil tanks and stuff like that. And they got paid pretty good money in those days. He made like $10 a day, which was pretty good wages compared to everything else. Later, when the Depression came, wages got down to practically nothing, $2 or $3 a day.
So tell me about the move to Washington.
Well, things got kind of tough down here. Dad had been working in the fish cannery and chopping some wood and building septic tanks and doing different jobs, whatever he could to make a living. Couldn't work there, and it really got down where he was really hurting from money. There was just didn't have no welfare, none of that stuff in those days. Couldn't get no food. And he had a family, 4 kids and a wife, and he had to feed them. So he somehow or another got enough money together to make a trip up to Washington State and work in the apple orchards up there to pick apples and make some money, send it home. And then after he got back from that, and I remember then Dad said, well, it's time to get out of this place and go where we can make a living. And then it's when he took us kids, and him and my mother decided upon it that was the best way to do it. And he got in that old car, and we all hauled up, my uncle and my cousin and my dad and my 3 brothers and I and our dog, in a 1927 Model T touring car, headed for Washington State.
Dad's recollection of the trip to Washington is highlighted by his dad's ingenuity.
And we had our ups and downs. We had our breakdowns, and our car broke down somewhere in California, and I remember got it under the shade of a tree, and Dad crawled under it and drained the oil out and saved it, and took the pan off of it and found that he had a conrod. What he called a conrod was all the babbitt was melted out of it, and it was gone, no bearing at all in it. So he always seemed to have a knack of being able to figure out some way to do something with everything that ever went wrong. And so out of the grub box, he got a big chunk of bacon rind and wrapped it around the journal of the crank shaft and rod bearing, and made a bearing out of it and tightened it back down and put it back together, put the pan back on it and poured the oil back in it, and he started it up and it ran. So he got it running again, and we drove it. Must have been the rest of that day, and we finally got to our destination, which was a town outside of the, it was a place called Dole Valley in Washington State. And that's where this farm was. And we got there, and he found some neighbor who told him how to find the place. And so we parked our little car there and kind of set up a little camp area, and we walked from there back to up the road toward this farm, and we couldn't find it. There was no house, no barn, no nothing. So then Dad, of course, found out that that place had burned down in 1912, and that woman didn't know anything about it. She just hadn't been there and had told him about all those things being there. So when he got back to camp, he said, well, guys, he says, I don't know just what we'll do, but he said, we don't have no money or no food. We're broke. He said, but, he said, we do have enough gas to get back into town. And he said, I noticed when we were coming back from where the old farmhouse was supposed to be, there were some berries growing there, and he says, I think they're blueberries. They might be huckleberries, he said, I don't know. But he said, I figure we could take some of these, one of these 10-gallon oil cans that we got here, and all go up there and pick those berries. And he said we can take them into town maybe and peddle them. And he said we can get something to eat. So we went back up there with Dad, and we all picked away at these berries, and we got this 5-gallon can full of these berries. So him and my uncle, they left us boys alone, and we had a campfire going, and we just sat there by the campfire, and they said they would be back. And of course, you take 4 little kids from a city and you put them out in the country, and there's all kinds of weird sounding noises and all those kind of things, and it really gets kind of spooky. It probably didn't get dark till about 10 o'clock or so, but after it got dark, we really got spooked. And then finally, it seemed like forever, but we saw a light coming up the road. And it was Dad coming back, and he had some groceries. And he had taken these berries into town, and he sold them for huckleberries or something, but he got $1 a gallon for them, and he had like $5. In those days was a lot of money, a lot of groceries. And so ended up with us making camp there for the night, and then he went to see somebody in the neighborhood, a guy by the name of West, lived down there. We went and talked to him about a new building. He was building a new goat house, goat barn, what he was building. It was all brand new. It was pretty good size, probably near the size of half of this barn. And he talked him into letting us move in there temporarily for a while. So Dad went to see Jerry York, and Jerry said, well, move into that railroad cabin down there on the river, he said. So we spent the rest of the winter there, and then next year we spent part of the summer there, and then Dad found a place over there that one of the farmers wanted some boys around to do a little farm work and stuff, so he gave us a place to live in an old cabin that was on his place. And so we made 2 or 3 winters there. It was not too bad. And wherever Dad could get work for somebody, he'd go and work for them, or haying, or whatever kind of farmers had work to do, why he'd work for wages. And we went to school then from that place, 2 or 3 years there. Finally decided to go to the orchard country where where the fruit grew, so we could work in the orchards and stuff. Went to the apple country. We went to Wenatchee, Washington. We had an aunt that lived there. Aunt Mariah and Uncle Frank lived there. And so we met up with them and stayed at their place for a few days, and Dad found us a place to live, and we moved in there, and he went to work for somebody up there doing something. I guess he contracted out some septic tanks or something like that he built, and so he was always kind of working at those things. And then when the apple season came, well, we went to work, and like he would go to work in the orchards, thinning apples. Here, of course, then he found some mining claims up in Leavenworth, Washington, and we went up there during the summer to work on the claims and take out gold. And then in the wintertime, we would come back to the city to live in Wenatchee, where we could work in the apple orchards and pick fruit and stuff. And then we made our living that way. Our boys were getting older, and Dad would take us out of school about 2 weeks early so we could make the cherry harvest, because us boys could work picking cherries. Along with Dad, we could make $18 a day picking cherries, and you can imagine how much that was when your normal wages are $3 a day. So we'd work about 2 or 3 weeks, and we'd go hit the cherries in Oregon, come back to the cherries in Wenatchee. And I think that's the way we did it, because they were earlier down south, and we managed to make about 6 weeks of those kind of wages. So we pretty well set for the summer then, and we could go to our claims and prospect for gold and fish and do all kinds of good summer things. We did those every summer. Had more vacation than my kids ever did. Later we moved into Leavenworth, and we went to school. Well, we lived in Dad got a place up in the Plains, that's where it was. He had an 80-acre piece of timberland up there, and he was going to make that into a farm. We built a cabin there, and we moved in there and lived there. My older brother stayed with his aunt down in Wenatchee so he could finish high school there. And the rest of us boys went to school on the bus from the Plains to Leavenworth, went to high school there, high school and grade school. And so then I quit high school when I was in 11th grade and joined the 3 Cs, because I could make about $30 a month in the CCCs.
Your dad didn't mind you getting out of high school a year early? It didn't give any trouble?
I don't know. Anyway, the thing is that what they did was easier for me to go and make that $25 a month, which they sent to him, and it gave them something to live on through the winter.
Dad left the 3 Cs to help his father build some hunters' cabins in the Washington backcountry. Later, when Dad's father was returning to Central California, where one of his brothers had just died, Dad decided to tag along and continue down into Southern California and visit his mother.
Yeah, I guess he had heard that his brother Uncle Rawl had passed away, and he wanted to go and look into his claims and see what was left there of them. And so we made a trip to California. We had an old 1926 Dodge, I think it was, or 25 or 26 Dodge that we went down there in. And so we made that trip down there, and from there, I took off from there and went said I was going to go see my mother, and I hitchhiked down to see her. And that's where it was. I went to work in the service station down there in California and stayed with my mother. That's right. That's where my brother Tim was. He was already down there. He was working down there in that same service station and in the grocery store for one of my uncles was working in there part-time. So I got a part-time job working in the grocery store and working in the service station.
By 1940, it was becoming clear that war was coming. A military draft was on the horizon, and it was clear to Dad that choosing the Navy was preferable to being drafted into the Army. But ironically, it still required permission from your parents if you were under 21. So it took several months to get both parents to sign off.
But my brother Tim, he didn't have to because he was already old enough. And so he joined up. I didn't realize it, but he joined up, and I got a letter from him that he'd already joined up the Navy. So he beat me in the Navy. He was in there ahead of me. And so that was it. I finally got permission to join from my dad, and I went down to Los Angeles and signed up. And they sent me to boot camp down in San Diego. And my brother Tim was already in boot camp when I got there.
Okay, so you're in the Navy now, but the war hasn't started yet, and you took your classes, you're a radioman. Where'd you go from there?
Well, I was 4 months in radio school, and I learned how to be a radio operator and Morse code and all that kind of stuff. And then it come time for me to get assigned to a station, and they signed me. I don't know whether I requested it, since my brother was on the Saratoga, he was in a squadron, or whether they sent me to the Saratoga, but anyway, I got assigned to the USS Saratoga. And so when I got there right away, I tried to get myself switched over to a squadron. In those days, in the peacetime Navy, they would try to station you with your relative if you had one in the service, brother or whatever. They would try to put you together. So I think I requested to get transferred to his squadron, and they happened to have a radio striker in the squadron they wanted to get rid of, so they traded him for me. And that's how I got in the squadron where my brother was.
Over the next year, the Saratoga and its crew practiced for war, sailing around the Pacific off the west coast. Dad got to ride in the back seat of a dive bomber as it practiced the almost suicidal vertical dives onto practice targets. Then, on December 7th, practice was over. The Saratoga was loading practice ordnance near Seal Beach when word of the attack reached them. Within days, they were on the way to Pearl Harbor. After arriving, they were deployed on a mission to save Wake Island. They got underway, but were soon called back. The Japanese force at Wake was just too great.
We just had a handful of ships, but we headed for Wake Island, and we were supposed to take off and fly in and land on the airfield, and we were warned about watching out for craters, bomb craters and stuff, anything like I say, and we were all ready to go, and we're supposed to go somewhere near 4:30 in the afternoon. 4:30 came, and we didn't get called, and one of the Marines said something about he thought we'd turned around. We was going the opposite, wrong way. The Marine pilots did, and sure enough, directly about 5:30 or so, we got a call over the intercom that the operations were canceled.
So the Sarah joined the reduced naval force providing protection for Hawaii. On January 9th, Dad's plane was flying over the Pacific between Midway and Hawaii, visually looking for signs of enemy subs.
We hadn't found anything, so I guess it was time to head back to the ship. And all of a sudden, over the intercom, I got a call in my phone that said, "Dodge, we're lost," he said. "It's up to you to find us back to the ship." So that kind of hit me as a shock. So I asked him if it was all right by him if I broke radio silence, because that's the only way I knew to find us back to the ship. And with that, he said, "I don't care what you break." He said, "Just find us back to the ship."
2 days later, January 11th, the Saratoga is torpedoed. She sustains damage, but is able to return stateside. Most of the air wing stays in theater, but Dad's squadron returns with Saratoga to provide protection from possible submarine attacks on the way stateside. Now, we're 1 month into the war, and the millions of men which will soon be available aren't. It will take many months yet to enlist and train a new Navy. So, with Saratoga stuck in Birmingham for major repair and upgrade, many are reassigned to support immediate needs. Dad gets reassigned to the Armed Guard and is sent to New Orleans for training. Early in the war, merchant ships on the East Coast were being sunk in record numbers. In an effort to reduce this, some guns were mounted on the ships. This required military to man them, thus the Armed Guard. After about 3 months, his commander tells him, since his ship was torpedoed, he's entitled to 6 weeks survivor's leave. He returns to his mother's place in San Pedro, and while hitchhiking around between San Pedro and Long Beach, he meets a family which has a son overseas, and he invites Dad and a friend for dinner.
So one time I didn't have anything to do, and I just decided that I would do that. And I don't remember what the occasion was, but I think my mother was going to go dancing or something. She loved to go dancing. And so I went over there, and when I was over there, one of their little neighbor friends was there, and that was Dorothy, and I met her. And we got taken with each other quite a bit right off the beginning and started in dating. And then from then on, I would be over to her house to see her instead of over at my grandparents' place in San Pedro. Wasn't much for me to do over there anyhow. So that's how I met my wife. And we got married because we had to. And
Did you propose or anything, or was it?
yeah, I did. We went to Las Vegas and got married. And her brother-in-law and sister took us over there to get married. They went with us. And so that was like in May of 42, I think it was. So then I stayed in the Armed Guard for another 2 or 3 months training guys with semaphore and stuff like that. And finally one of the guys came and he said, "Hey," he said, "they're looking for third-class radiomans in the Atlantic Fleet, and they got a sign up on a bulletin board for third-class radiomans to go to the Atlantic Fleet." So I said, "Yeah, that suits me fine," because in the Armed Guard, I'd heard that there were 10 ships that left out of Mobile Harbor headed for Port of Spain, and they got two of them arrived there.
Dad is able to transfer to the Atlantic Fleet, assigned as a radioman aboard the USS Cole. Commissioned in 1919, the Cole is a destroyer with 4 stacks and the fastest in her class. She is assigned convoy duty.
So that's what we did. We went to North Atlantic duty and convoyed merchant ships across the Atlantic till they met up with the British escorts, and we'd turn them over to them, and they'd take them on into England. And we'd turn and come back and get another convoy and go with them. And so that's what we did for quite a while.
In October of 42, the Cole is assigned to support Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. Because of her speed, the planning was to use her to carry an assault force directly into the port of Safi in Morocco. The crew was given some assault training in case something happened to the ship and they found themselves ashore. But prior to departure, plans changed, and married, non-critical crew were transferred to the aircraft carrier USS Ranger. This would include Dad. So, while the Cole took the port of Safi, Dad was on the Ranger as part of the assault on Casablanca. The Ranger and Cole returned to Norfolk. Dad returned to the Cole, which continued to operate along the East Coast December through February. Pictures of my dad holding an infant, my brother Dan, who was born December 23rd, indicate he was able to get home during that time frame, because his ship left at the end of February to support the war in the Mediterranean and would not return for about a year. In late February, the Cole returns to the Mediterranean to support the invasion of Sicily. One of its most dangerous missions was mapping minefields for the troop landings. Partnered with a British submarine, the sub underwater detecting and avoiding the mines, and the Cole staying directly above to accurately chart the safe course, and then using its best speed to get back out of range.
So we led that invasion there at Sicily. We'd go in and take our bearing off of that submarine, and then get our position from that, and then turn a light out to sea and lead the minesweepers in. The minesweepers would come in, and then the invasion fleet would follow them. So
the Cole would return to the East Coast in December of 43, where it needed an overhaul. About this time, Dad was transferred to ship's company on the yet-to-be-commissioned Lyman K. Swenson, a Sumner-class destroyer, DD-729. Dad spent the spring of 44 in the Boston area as the ship was being readied for commissioning, which occurred May 2nd, 1944. My mother was able to travel to Boston during that time, so I guess that's why my sister was born in December of 44. The Swenson would complete its shakedown cruise on the East Coast, pass through the Panama Canal on August 8, 1944. It then joined the Pacific Fleet, then anchored in the Caroline Islands at Ulithi Atoll. For the next year, the Swenson supported fleet actions all over the South Pacific, shelling Formosa, supporting fleet actions during the Leyte Gulf battles in the Philippines, then as part of the fleet actions during the invasion of Okinawa, where it's credited with downing 2 aircraft. The war ends while Dad's ship is in the Japanese waters, and him and some of his crewmates actually get to go ashore.
And we got to go tie up at the docks at that naval station there to go on liberty there. You know, it was just the little dirt streets and little cardboard houses and
Shortly after the war ends, Dad's 6-year enlistment is completed. Dad would return to Long Beach and his young wife, buy a home, and raise 3 children. In May of 1948, Dad would receive word that his father had drowned in the Kern River while prospecting. These pictures show the rugged area and the spot in the river where his boat capsized. His body was later found downriver. Mom and Dad would raise 3 children. My brother would graduate high school in 1960, enter the Navy, where he would stay for 20 years, get married, and raise 2 sons. My sister would graduate in 1962, get married, and raise 2 children. I would graduate in 1965, spend 4 years in the Navy, get my college degree, get married to an older woman with 4 children, and raise the younger 2. Dad would lose his mother in 1970, and the 4 boys would be together for the last time, along with their half-sister. After 35 years working in the oil field, he and my mother would retire and leave Long Beach, moving to Medford, Oregon to live with my sister and her family on 5 acres. For most of the next 2 decades, Dad would mentor another generation of kids. Always teaching by example, those rare insights into what makes a person an adult. At 81, my dad left us. But remains in our hearts.
And we're here today to honor my grandfather's life. I had always imagined speaking about him at his funeral, but at the same time, I never thought it would really happen, because I thought he'd live forever.
Don't feel sorry for me, because I had a good life.
I don't know what I know.